For the price of a cup of coffee, join my Patreon. The page includes audio documentaries not available on my YouTube channel. Link below in the description. Thanks for watching. On January 21st, 1971, John Lennon sat down and gave an interview with Rolling Stone magazine. Jan Wenner, the founder of the magazine, was to interview John. The interview would last 3 hours and 30 minutes. As they sat down, Jan noticed John holding papers. He stated, "Oh, you've got notes?" To which John replied, "Well, we've got to get it right." Disclosure, I will only go through the points in this interview not covered in my other Beatles videos. They began by talking about the latest album releases from each members of the Beatles. Starting with George's album, All Things Must Pass, John states, "I think it's alright. Personally at home I wouldn't play that kind of music. I don't want to hurt George's feelings. I think it's better than Paul's." Moving on to Paul's album, McCartney, John states, "I think Paul's was rubbish. I think he'll make a better one when he's frightened into it." When asked about Ringo's second album, John states, "I think it's a good record. I don't feel as embarrassed as I did about his first record." Later in the interview, he goes on to say maybe he expects too much when listening to an album. When asked about George's guitar playing, John states, "He's pretty good. I prefer myself." As a guitar player, John felt George was too self-conscious to really let himself go. He went on to say Yoko's constant praise of his guitar work made John cocky about himself. He states Eric Clapton too praised John's guitar playing when he joined the Plastic Ono band. John talks about watching the film Let It Be. He states he felt sad and that the film had been edited to make Paul look good. He states the film was set up by Paul for Paul and was painted as Paul is God and we're just lying around. In closing, he states, "I felt sick." On the Beatles' breakup, John states the band really broke up after Brian's death. He dismissed the White Album as me and a backing group and Paul and a backing group. When questioned why John uses Phil Spector as a producer instead of George Martin, John states, "It's nothing personal. He's more of Paul's style of music than mine." He goes on to praise Phil Spector, stating he's a great artist, but like all great artists, he's very neurotic. On George Martin, John states, "He's another one that thinks he made us, but I'd like to hear George Martin's songs." Reflecting on the time Paul took over as leader, John states, "Over the next albums, Paul had a tendency to contact him and say, 'I've written 10 songs, let's record.' John would then say, 'Give me a few days,' and quickly put some songs together." John talks about the film The Magical Mystery Tour. At the time, Paul contacted him with the idea that they write sequences for a film. He states, "Paul came to me and said, 'Here's the idea, here's the segment, you write a piece for that.' And I thought, fuck now, I've never written a film. What does he mean?" Talking again on the breakup of the Beatles, John states, "I had to be either married to Yoko or the Beatles, and I chose Yoko." He speaks about the other Beatles' opinion of Yoko, stating, "Paul was quoted in the paper saying he hated her and now he likes her. George insulted her right to her face because of the things he heard from Bob Dylan and others in New York." While in Apple, George had told Yoko, "You give off bad vibes." John stated, "I didn't hit him, I don't know why. I was in shock." As the interview goes on, interestingly, John can't remember if the White Album was before Rubber Soul or which one contained the hand-drawn sketch of the four. Getting back to the White Album, John is asked about what he meant by "the walrus was Paul" on the song Glass Onion. John states that at the time he just wanted to say something nice to Paul and in a way thank him for holding the group together after Brian's death. In a strange contrast, John later says Paul has this idea that we should be thankful for keeping the group together. On the White Album, John states he wrote the songs while in India around gurus and was supposedly at the place where he should be most content. Yet, he was writing lyrics such as "I'm so tired" and "I'm so lonely, I wanna die." When asked about Abbey Road, he gives a contrasting opinion of his previous statement. John now states, "I like the A-side. I never liked that pop opera on the other side. I think that's junk." Summing up the album, he states, "It was competent, like Rubber Soul, but it had no life really." Of his favourite Beatles songs, he lists Help, Girl and Across the Universe, which he says might contain possibly his best lyrics. On the Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership, John maintains they wrote the best stuff apart. When questioned, he tells Wenner the pair wrote together mainly because they enjoyed it. At this point, John begins to talk about his substance abuse over the years. He states, "I've been on pills since I was 15. I was a drop-down drunk in art college. I was a pill addict until Help. Then we switched to pot and drop drink. I've always needed a drug to survive, and the others too." He states he and Yoko began taking heroin because of how the Beatles and others were treating them. Of all the members, he states Paul is the most stable. In reference to substances, Wenner asks if Paul is the most straight. John replies, "He's the most stable of us, not straight." John is then asked about his opinions on Charles Manson and Helter Skelter. John states, "Well, he's balmy. He's like any other Beatles fan who reads mysticism into it." Asked again about the film Let It Be, John states, "It was a dreadful feeling filming at Twickenham Studios. I just wanted them to go away and we'd be there at 8 in the morning. You can't make music at 8 in the morning." Back on the subject of Paul's music, John states, "I think he's capable of great work and I think he will do it." When questioned further on how the Beatles felt after Brian Epstein's death, John states, "I don't know how any of them think any more than you do. I know them pretty well, but I know Yoko better." John then talks of his and Yoko's love of the film Citizen Kane and brings up Orson Welles, stating, "Poor old Orson. He goes on Dick Cavett and he's like, 'Please love me. I did do well when I was younger. I can act and I can direct, but at the moment I don't do anything.'" John goes on to talk about Bob Dylan, stating, "I respect him a lot. I know Paul didn't. Paul was jealous of any other artist." As the interview comes to an end, John is asked if there's anything more he'd like to add. He states, "No, I can't think of anything positive or heartwarming to win your readers over." John finishes by saying he hopes by the time he's 64, he'll be living off the coast of Ireland, looking through a scrapbook of memories.